Have you ever wanted to redesign the street you live on? How about that park close to your house? If you watch this channel, there's a good chance the answer is yes. But have you ever felt like it just wasn't possible? It can probably seem like a daunting task. After all, people's whole careers are based around redesigning streets and navigating the political bureaucracy that makes it all possible. But if you hang out at a place often enough, you'll almost certainly start noticing things you wish were different about it. Things like wishing the bike lanes felt safer, wishing the park had more amenities. Maybe parking your car is tough and you wish that was easier. I know my name is Car Free Keith and all, but I'm not gonna judge you for wanting that. The point is, you have a valid opinion, and you have more power to make changes happen than you think. This is Eddie. Eddie's a really smart guy, and he's been advocating for things like safer streets for the better part of a decade. But he's also just one guy who had an idea to make his neighborhood park better. He started observing traffic patterns and quantifying the things he didn't like about the park with the real traffic engineering and roadway design principles. He even launched a survey and got feedback from people around the community. He used all that to draw out what a redesigned park could look like, and now he's talking to his local officials to see how it can actually get done. This is a really good example of using your free will really well, because any of us can do exactly this too. If you've ever had an idea like this, but just haven't gotten around to doing anything about it, please tell me about it in the comments, and maybe we can make a video about it. And stick around to the end to find out how to redesign your favorite local public space. This episode, Palmer Square in Logan Square, Chicago. Palmer Square is one of the jewels along Chicago's necklace of park-lined boulevards stretching from Chicago's south side up through the west side and ending on the northwest side. The square itself is an original piece of the boulevard system, having been created by Chicago's West Park System Commission in the early 1870s. As the city developed outward, grand residences started popping up along the square and the surrounding boulevards in the 1880s and early 1900s. It was right around then that the safety bike would come into popularity, kickstarting an early biking craze in Chicago. Remember that biking as a whole was still in its infancy, and the boulevard system quickly became a hot spot for cyclists going for pleasure rides around what was then the outskirts of the city. Palmer Square quickly became one of the best gathering spots for cyclists. The oval-shaped road around the square, at just about 1,000 meters long, was originally used as a cycle track. A Chicago Tribune article from May 1896 described the Associated Cycling Club's annual run at Palmer Square as a kaleidoscope of color, since all the different clubs wore signature colors and patterns as they rode. Ignaz Schwinn, yeah, the Schwinn bike guy, actually lived right off the southeast side of the square in the 1910s. The square is located about 4.5 miles northwest of the Chicago Loop, about a 22-minute trip including the 10-minute walk to the nearby California Blue Line station. Oddly enough, no bus routes actually run on any of the streets that make up the square, with the Armitage bus being 1,100 feet south, the California bus being almost 1,400 feet east, the Fullerton bus being 1,200 feet north, and the Kimball bus also being just about 1,400 feet west. The square is at the heart of a residential pocket of the Logan Square community area, and is mostly fronted by gorgeous turn-of-the-century brick buildings. Most of them are palatial single-family residences, but there are a few apartment buildings there too. And you've also got 2 churches and 1 school, which is linked to one of the churches. Schools and churches are 2 neighborhood functions that often see a surge of traffic around specific times: pick-up and drop-off for the kids, and Sunday and weeknight services for the churches. At the same time, this is a particularly prized area for people who live here. Home values are pretty high, and a lot of people don't really want the neighborhood to change, and it definitely looks very similar to how it would have even 50 years ago. Except even further back from then, the road layout was a bit different, but we'll come back to that. But inevitably, as more affluent areas of the city closer to the lake have gotten more and more expensive, people looking for city amenities have been pushed out to places like Palmer Square, further pushing out longtime residents, and contributing to a pretty stark demographic shift in the neighborhood from nearly 2/3 Hispanic or Latino in 2000 to over half the population being white by 2020. Zooming into the park itself, you can quickly see that it has a variety of trees. It's actually an officially accredited arboretum, packing 28 species of trees into just 7.7 acres of park.
So this is a really nice park. It's just over 7 acres, and that's a great thing to have. Tons of stuff happens here, most of it unofficially, which I really like. People just sort of organically use the space. My name is Eddie Lewald. I live here in Chicago, Illinois, in the 60647 zip code. That's Logan Square, if you're not in the know. We're standing in Palmer Square Park, which is a mere half a block from my house, and it's a very nice place. and we're going to talk a little bit about it today. On Tuesdays, over my left shoulder, it's a Tuesday right now, and you might be able to see the juggling club that meets back there. That's a super fun thing. I've seen people set up yurts here. People have barbecues, people hang out and play music on a nice day. All these trees are just festooned with hammocks and people reading, just hanging out with their friends and walking their dogs and being out in the public space together. And it's really nice. So that's a lovely thing to have close to home.
The tree cover really adds to the vibe of this park, making it feel much larger and more deep than it really is. Being a runner myself, I love the gravel jogging trail circling the park, and that was upgraded back in 2008 thanks to a grant from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. That grant also provided for a new playground inspired by the classic Marjorie Williams children's book, The Velveteen Rabbit. Outside of that, there's not really that many official amenities in the park, but that's fine honestly. Just having a neighborhood-scale nature sanctuary close to you has been proven by multiple studies to reduce sadness, stress, and anxiety for people who live nearby, even if they never really stop and spend time in the park. I think we can all agree that the world would be a better place with less of those three things, but within just about every park, and especially in Chicago, I would add, there's always barriers to using it. Things that might prevent some people from spending time in the park, and elements that might make the park less enjoyable for people who do hang out there.
The park itself is quite lovely. I don't think it really has that many problems. It's the roads around the park. They are wide roads, they are straight as an arrow, and they really encourage speeding, which is not great because it's a park. There's an elementary school right over there. A lot of confusing intersections, very wide and straight roads that encourage very fast driving, and just sort of an overabundance of asphalt generally.
To go through these problems, let's look at each side of the square one by one. As part of that, it helps to briefly explain how Chicago's grid works. It repeats itself in a really predictable pattern that generally keeps the usually 4-lane arterial roads a mile apart from each other. Halfway between each busy road, you have a neighborhood collector, usually just one lane in each direction with a parking lane and sometimes a painted bike lane. Halfway between those, every quarter-mile street, if you want to think of it that way, you have a quiet neighborhood street that sometimes even has some additional features like painted bike arrows. Palmer Street is one of those quarter-mile streets. Just like most other streets like it, it's an entirely quiet residential street for most of its run through the neighborhood. It's one of those types of streets where you have to lock in and slow down to squeeze past an oncoming car. Once it gets to the square, Palmer goes into a sort of uncharacteristic one more lane bro paralysis, where it splits into two wide one-ways, westbound only on the north side and eastbound only in the south. It goes from one narrow lane each way to 2 or 3 lanes each way. Both sides have a painted door zone bike lane too. The first problem with this is that these roads really have no business being this wide from a traffic demand perspective. The roads get wider here presumably just to continue the uniform width of the boulevard system to carry it from Humboldt Boulevard northwest to Kedzie, but there's really nobody that would use it that way. If you're ever heading south on Kedzie or north on Humboldt, following the boulevard system around Palmer Square would just mean you have to do one extra left turn to go east or west, so you're probably not going to do that. The Chicago Boulevard system was first thought of as a place for leisurely movement. You might use the whole route as a nice relaxing Sunday drive or bike ride and enjoy all the nice nature and architecture. But it's not really a route that someone would follow for more than one leg as a vital transportation route. So you end up having all this extra width surrounding 2 sides of the square that you don't really need. That width sends a signal to drivers. Speed up. If you are driving around the square, you almost certainly will feel like 30 miles per hour is too slow given the design of the street. And this is a park after all, a place where kids are playing, where people are trying to relax and unwind, all things that don't mix well with speeding cars. Speaking of speeding cars, there's another rough spot of Palmer Square that we need to talk about. Sacramento Avenue, which becomes Humboldt Boulevard south of Palmer Street, forms the east side of the main part of the square. Sacramento is technically another quarter-mile street, but it's a lot more robust than usual, built more like a neighborhood collector that you'd see halfway between the arterials. As Sacramento becomes Humboldt, it opens up from a neighborhood collector to a 4-lane, almost arterial level road. North of the square, Sacramento has narrow traffic lanes, a painted bike lane, parking, and even curb bump outs in places to visually and physically narrow the street, so drivers will naturally feel constrained to 25 or 30 miles per hour. But once they get that green light and see that open lane in front of them heading south, mentally, most drivers will think, let's rev up the engines and speed up since there's no more narrow lanes and I can finally pass this slow guy in front of me. And that's exactly what a lot of drivers do. Unfortunately, all that action happens right next to the square, making an unfortunate amount of space in that end of the park a lot less enjoyable to hang out in. It also reinforces the weird end caps at the east and west ends of the square, which are basically not usable to anyone and are just pure green space. Green space is good, but green space where people feel like they can hang out is better. Ideally, wouldn't you want the square to have as much usable space as possible? On the west side of the square, you have an opposite thing going on, but it's still not great. North of the square, Kedzie is built just like Humboldt Boulevard is to the south. A 50 or 55 foot wide arterial-style road with 2 traffic lanes in each direction and a painted center median. This is pretty much the design for the entire run of Chicago's boulevard system, with one-way frontage roads on either side that form the actual boulevard space. Those roads themselves are actually pretty decent for biking, just watch out for car doors opening up suddenly. Some of the main boulevard roads have even used that 50-foot width to turn one of the traffic lanes into a fully buffered bike lane, like Franklin Boulevard between Sacramento and Central Park. South of Palmer Square, Kedzie goes from that typical boulevard design to a really quaint, narrower boulevard with a 10-foot wide planting strip, narrower car lanes, a paint-buffered bike lane, and a parking lane. All those features naturally slow drivers down to 30 or 35 miles per hour, but you still get that racing out of the gates effect here, this time for northbound drivers, like this guy here who blasts past a line of traffic once the road gets wider. And also, just like on the east side, the west end cap of the park is cut off from the main part of the park by a busy road. Those end caps are generally just pretty hard to get to, and they can feel loud, exposed, and just too small to really hang out in, kinda like you're not supposed to go there. The arced roads at the east and west ends of the square, what used to be the curves of the cycle track back in the day, end up being pretty useless now and just add a lot of confusion to the intersections. They do seem to be a pretty critical source of parking for the church, but it's kind of funny that this doesn't seem to officially be a place for parking at all. The northeast intersection here is pretty egregious, with 3 lanes awkwardly coming together at the intersection. If you're headed west on Palmer, sorry, no left turns for you, but a lot of people will still do it anyway, even though it's kind of a blind turn. This intersection in general gives drivers 27 different possible maneuvers, way too much room for error in an area shared with lots of cyclists and pedestrians. So why do I even bother bringing any of this up? Well, let's ask this. What's the goal of Palmer Square? I think like any park, it's a haven for nature in the city, and in this case it's an officially accredited arboretum. It's a place to hang out, to relax after a taxing day of work or just running around the craziness of the city. It's a transportation route, sure, but the main useful transportation corridors both run north to south around the outsides of the square. The square itself doesn't really need to be a part of that equation as an east-west connector between Humboldt and Kedzie. If Palmer Square is supposed to be a little pocket of nature, relaxation, and community in the city, and not first and foremost a useful transportation node, why not maximize that? What would that even look like? It might be as simple as just going back to the way the square used to look in the 1920s, before a lot of the green space was given up to cars without a clear need to do so. But I think our friend Eddie has some more to say about that. I think one way to judge how nice a park is by asking yourself, could I take a nap here? And obviously there's a lot that goes into that. You want a place that has some nice tree cover and at least feels like it's secluded from other people, but also you want it to feel a little bit like nature, like it's at least somewhat blocking out the sensory overload of the city, like traffic noise, honking, sirens, all that stuff. A great public space should feel comfortable enough for you to take ownership of it. I've taken plenty of naps in parks, and all the things I just listed a second ago matter, but now I have a way to make it all easier with this month's sponsor, Manta Sleep. I'm someone who prioritizes sleep maybe more than most people. I try to get at least 8 or 9 hours a night, and since I've started using the Manta Sleep mask, it's honestly helped a lot. Because even when you're not trying to sleep in a literal park, there's still lots of ambient noise and light that gets into your room, and the Manta Sleep sound mask really helps block that stuff out. What I love about this mask is that it truly provides absolute darkness and blocks out sound really well too, and it does all that while still feeling really comfortable. It's a really nice product that you can adjust to however feels best for you. Whether you're taking a nap in the park this summer or just trying to block out that early morning sun, a Manta Sleep mask is a great way to do either. Use the promo code CARFREE at checkout for 10% off your order. It's also a great way to support the channel. Now we're getting to the part of the story where a lot of us find ourselves, I think. We intuitively start noticing things about our community that we wish were different, but how do you actually go about making things change? Eddie would go on to develop a pretty cool vision for how to rework Palmer Square, and don't worry, we're about ready to start talking about it. But first I had to ask him, what gave you these ideas, and how did you get to where you are now, where you're going public with them, and taking official steps to try and make changes?
In addition to just hanging out and spending time in the park, I travel through it a lot. Going to meet friends, going to restaurants, going shopping. Most of my places that I go mean that I walk through the park on my way there. And so just kind of using it that much, I started to notice that I was having close calls with drivers at a couple key hotspots. Once I started noticing all these little kind of hotspots, I started to look at the park as a whole and think about, why is this happening? How are people behaving and why are they behaving that way? What in the environment might cause that? And I started to observe these really wide, really straight roads. I had a hypothesis that on this Sacramento cut through that's just in front of me here, it's 4 lanes, and I had a theory that most drivers were not using the 2 outside lanes. Most of that traffic is going to the inside. And so, like a crazy person, I kind of hung out here and I camped out and I just watched and observed the way traffic moved through this little cut through. And it turns out I was right. It's about 3 out of every 10 cars uses those lanes. I had a hypothesis you could narrow that road tomorrow and it wouldn't change anything. And then my kind of observations backed that up, and that was really nice to see. Another hypothesis I had was that there were other people who felt the same way I did. So to quantify that feeling, I created a survey with some sort of open-ended questions about how people feel about the roads and whether they would be open to some temporary changes. And me and some Strong Towns folks set up in the park one day and we just surveyed people. We gave out free snacks. And I also spoke with a reporter from Block Club who got the survey in our, kind of local newspaper. And between those 2 things, I got about 400 responses, which is overwhelmingly in favor of trying out some new ideas around the park. And that was really heartening to get that response. Once I had collected enough theories about the park, I sat down to kind of what that might actually look like, which is a whole different ballgame, turns out. Actually coming up with a plan and drawing it out is a lot different than having a vague idea, but it was really fun. I'm not a designer and I'm not an artist, so I had some hills to climb there, but I really enjoyed it. And that's how we got to where we are today.
We're going to walk through Eddie's redesign step by step, but there's one really important thing I want to emphasize as we do that. All this stuff can be implemented little by little. It doesn't have to be some huge, expensive project where everything gets done all at once, basically irreversibly. It can even start in little bits as a trial run, a sort of pilot project to get residents used to the changes so nothing feels too drastic. This is kind of the opposite approach the city took to redesign Logan Square, about a half-mile north of Palmer Square. That redesign was done basically all at once, an expensive, all-encompassing project that took years to design and build. And honestly, most people in the neighborhood don't love the changes. Cyclists don't really like it, drivers sure don't like it. There are some positives, for sure, but no matter what side of the aisle you're on, so to speak, I think everyone feels it could have been done better. This is where incremental change can be useful. By making small changes bit by bit, testing and fine-tuning things in real time, the design can be tweaked to get it to a point where everyone's a bit more satisfied with it, and nobody feels like big, unpopular, and expensive permanent changes are being shoved down their throat. So, let's walk through this design step by step. What are the small steps Eddie has laid out for us, and what does he see the endgame looking like? The first step is pretty simple, just a few bump outs to reinforce the existing traffic flow and add a bit of calming to the equation. Features like these help break drivers out of that highway hypnosis frame of mind, so to speak, forcing them to slow down and pay attention as they move through or make a turn. When you have a lot of people moving through on foot or on a bike, it seems like pretty common sense to me to make sure the operator of the 3,000-pound machine is forced to pay attention. This step, like pretty much all the 3 steps we'll go over, could even be done by the community using washable paint, potted plants, or flex posts that run about $50 a piece. Phase 2 adds on to the bump outs, again making the intersections easier to navigate for people on foot and prompting drivers to be more intentional as they move through. This is also where we start narrowing Humboldt Boulevard a little bit. Remember earlier how we talked about drivers not really using those outer lanes anyway? This will naturally slow drivers down as they move past the park, and just push that racing out of the gates effect further south, away from where people are trying to relax and enjoy the park space. That reclaimed space not only calms traffic down, it also serves as a buffer to make the sidewalks themselves more usable, and it helps set the stage for the final trial phase, if the community likes the first two. This is where we really start reimagining the traffic flow entirely. The Humboldt Boulevard cut-through is closed off, at least temporarily for the trial. Oh, and by the way, all the stuff I'm talking about here for the east side of the square would also be done identically over on the west side. The space can become seating, a community garden, restrooms, or space set aside for micro businesses like food or craft stalls. Traffic gets fully routed around the square on its east and west sides using those curved roads. The parking gets reorganized, so even though you lose total asphalt coverage, which, by the way, anytime you can have less paved surface, you should absolutely do that, but you still have the same number of parking spaces here. The current traffic pattern around the square is basically drive really fast and then probably stop for a minute at the stoplight and then floor it again. That's really the worst of both worlds for everyone. It's not faster for drivers since you might have to wait at the light, and whenever a car is moving, it's moving faster, so it's more of a threat to anyone outside of a car. This new arrangement lets things just flow at a more uniform speed. Anytime drivers have to stop to let a pedestrian or cyclist pass, it's pretty quick. And when traffic moves at a slower, more uniform speed, less people will be involved in car crashes. If these changes work out, and they should, they really are in everyone's best interest. Eddie has a slightly more amped up version of what a more permanent redesign could look like. This one would have protected bike lanes moving around the whole outer drives of the park and a more seamless north-south bike connection through the reclaimed paved space. Palmer Street on the north and south sides rightfully gets narrowed to one traffic lane, still with parking on either side. This vision really is a whole lot closer to how the founders of this park would have envisioned it to be, and for all the reasons we've touched on here and alluded to earlier with all that traffic routing nonsense, you don't lose out on any modern traffic functionality the square has. What you end up with here is a quieter, safer version of the park with the potential to add new amenities to make it even more of a hub for the community. What I love about this plan is that it's actionable for anyone. It's really a step-by-step process, with each step building on the last. The first thing is to just document things you notice about your neighborhood. Maybe it's that road crossing that feels unsafe and could use a pedestrian refuge island in the middle. You don't have to try and redesign anything yourself at this stage. This is where I'd highly encourage you to go check out your local urbanist group and run it by some people there. Chances are there will be someone there who knows what they're doing and can give you design tips. If you can't find a group like that, maybe start one. I guarantee you'll meet a lot of cool people in the process. At the same time, I'd also recommend getting your neighbors involved somehow. If there's a local block club or neighborhood group, loop them in about the work you're doing. People can sometimes be quick to shoot down an idea they feel they haven't been consulted about. And honestly, that's probably the biggest obstacle to making these changes. Even though Palmer Square might be a more extreme case where neighbors don't want change, every place is like that to some degree. Longtime homeowners usually don't like to see things change drastically. It helps if changes can be made little by little, and with their inclusion at every step. Maybe try doing what Eddie did and create a public survey. Just like he ended up finding out, maybe the support for good changes is a lot stronger than you'd think, and that just gives even more credence to your ideas. Once you've done all that and have at least a solid concept drawing of what the reimagined space could look like, try reaching out to your lowest level elected official around you. Could be your alderperson, city council person, or even the mayor. At this point, you should have at least some backing from folks in the area, and maybe even some data to support your idea, so hopefully that'll mean something to your local official. Just like Eddie's vision for Palmer Square, try to make it so you can execute it little by little, maybe even using temporary fixes and trial runs to help people feel less threatened by the sudden changes. Here's the thing, I also wish there wasn't a vocal minority of people who are fighting against things that are ultimately in their best interests, but if we want to actually get things done, we have to work with these people, unless they're actively trying to sue you.
I think anytime you propose something like this, there's always a small but very loud group of people who are opposed to any kind of change, even if it's in their best interest, and it's in everybody's best interest. So I'm expecting to hear from them as we move throughout this process. I also don't know how CDOT will react because they're gonna have design standards that I'm not aware of. I'm really hoping to mitigate both of those things by advocating for trying some of this stuff temporarily first, to show the neighbors that this is actually really nice, to try out some things and make sure they work before investing money and materials into it. And I will mention at this moment that my plan to reorganize this space doesn't lose any parking spaces. And I think that's a really important part of it. There's so much inefficiency in the current design that you can literally reclaim like 2 acres of asphalt for park space and not lose any parking. It just sort of moves it around a little bit.
This definitely isn't a one-size-fits-all process, and Eddie's ideas are actually gaining quite a bit of traction, probably more quickly than they would in some Chicago wards because this specific alderman is usually really supportive of these kinds of changes. But the important thing is that there's always some things you can do.
So as far as things you can do, step 1, have an idea. That's the easy one. Step 2 is talk to people about that idea. That's how I got started, was kind of building that internal momentum where every time I mentioned this to someone, I was affirmed. And that really helped me feel like I was on the right track, to the point where I got motivated enough to create a survey and talk to the alderman and spend my winter drawing up this plan. To that end, I would say the other piece of advice I have is be patient, because this stuff is hard and it takes a lot of work and it takes more time than you want it to take. I am personally trying to cultivate a slow but steady tortoise mindset on this, and I'm trying to just allow it to go as fast as it's going. But be patient with yourself, take breaks, but also if you have a good idea that you believe in, keep working on it. Chip away at it as best you can, because this kind of stuff takes time, but I think it's the right thing to do.